Okay, we're going to pick up again, start a new chapter, chapter 4. It's called Concentration and Wisdom. Chinese, I think, is Ding and Hui. These, the next two chapters, for those of you who are really interested in the underpinning teachings of sitting meditation, of meditation practice, really want to look at these. Again, as I point out, they're very short. Here I'm holding them, like, that's it. And there's a certain irony to this because this is often considered to be the meditation text, the teaching of the Zen or Chan school, and yet the actual passages devoted to that are very short, very terse, and I think you'll find they're of a consistent pattern with a dismantling of preconceptions about what meditation is and a resettling of it or a repositioning of it into this mind ground, what he calls the mind ground dharma. And he does this, as we've seen, with so many things. The earlier chapters, he did this with merit and virtue, the practice of donations, of charity, of giving, and he took those out of a misunderstanding and brought those back into what they called the mind ground and said, basically, although they generate blessings and to some extent some good karma, they don't liberate, they don't lead to the end of suffering, and they don't certainly generate this prajna wisdom of the great liberation. Then he went into other practices like reciting the Buddha's name, said that's also very good, nothing wrong with that if done properly. But at the same time he said that is also only accessible to the pure mind. The pure land is accessible to the pure mind. As the mind is purified, the Buddha land is purified. So again, he took this back to the mind ground. I'm trying to think what else in those two chapters. Anything else on those that he dismantled in those earlier chapters? That was, Prefect Wei was asking all these questions. And later he's going to talk about morality or precepts, and he's going to give us a teaching on mind ground morality as opposed to simply following the rules or holding the precepts. Everything he's teaching is from and to this essential nature. All his teachings come from this essential nature, and all point us back to this essential nature. Now, when I say dismantle, I mean it in a positive sense. I don't mean to say that he takes it apart and throws it away. He simply unties the misuse of it or the misunderstanding of it. So basically, a wholesome practice like reciting the Buddha's name, holding the precepts, giving and offerings and so forth, can be twisted and turned by intentionality or wrong intention. And so the wrong mind doing a good dharma turns it into a bad dharma, and the right mind using a neutral or even necessarily not a wholesome dharma can turn it into a good dharma. For example, many religious teachings say that acquiring money is bad, but a proper mind acquiring money can use it to transform and create good. A petty mind, a small mind, even the dollar can do damage. So it's not the case that the rightness or wrongness is in necessarily the external action, but the wise and good use of actions with the mind that generates this. So he's always paying attention to the mind ground, what he calls the essential nature, our own mind, our own heart, and asks us not only to examine there, but to bring our changes and transformations down to that level. That all the external things we do are good or not, but essentially you have to go to the root or the source, what he calls the king. And the king is this mind ground. So now, as we go into this chapter, these two chapters, one is called Concentration and Wisdom, and this is Ding and Hui, I explained. And the next one is sitting meditation, which is probably in Chinese, I haven't looked back, it's probably Zhuo Chan. Zhuo means to sit in dhyana. But both of these are talking essentially about the philosophy of meditation practice. So let's start, we'll read a section of this just in whole. I'm going to read from 45 to 46 with no intention or commitment to get there. Okay? We will start on this journey, but whether we arrive there tonight, I don't know. Knowing how way leads on to way, I doubted that I shall ever finish. The Master addressed the assembly. Good and wise friends, this Dharma teaching of ours is rooted in concentration and wisdom. Don't be confused and say that concentration and wisdom are different. Concentration and wisdom are of one essence, not two. Concentration is the essence of wisdom, and wisdom is the functioning of concentration. Where there is wisdom, concentration exists right within that wisdom. Where there is concentration, wisdom exists right within the concentration. If you grasp the meaning of this, you know that wisdom and concentration are complementary and studied together. By the way, the last line, studied together, also means practice together. In this model, study and practice are completely fused. To study is to practice is to study. To separate them would be inconceivable to the patriarch. Why would you study something that you didn't live in practice? It would make no sense. And why would you practice something that wasn't informed by learning and study and textual, it doesn't make sense. The purpose of study is to awaken. The purpose of study is to recover the lost mind. The purpose of study is to figure out what this life is about and what the meaning is. I know this goes against vocational learning as it's generally taught in the universities. But if we go back to the ancient texts, not only in the Buddhist texts, but throughout the deeper traditions, both East and West, you'll find that study had to do with self-transformative education, changing yourself into a better person and using the world in a better way. It didn't have necessarily anything to do with making money. Sorry. Okay, I digressed. I got to the last before the first. So let's go back to the first. Good and wise friends. He continues to address his assembly in this very respectful way. And he's not doing this out of some sort of rhetorical ploy or kind of, false flattery. He's generally saying, as his teaching says, all of you are good and wise advisors. All of you have this potential for Buddhahood. I address you in this level and equal manner. I too am a cultivator of the way. You might think I'm more advanced and you might think you're less advanced, but fundamentally there's no difference between us. And you remember how this is illustrated in his first encounter with Hongren, his teacher, when he comes, and Hongren says, "Why are you here?" And he says, humbly, "I just came to be a Buddha, nothing else." And Hongren says, "Well, that's not possible. You're a southerner, barbarian, you don't even learning, blah, blah, blah." And the sixth patriarch to be says, "What does that have to do with anything? The fundamental nature is the same in us, even though I'm from the south and you're from the north, even though you're a high monk and I'm just a wood gatherer. Essentially, what difference is there?" Hongren's, not bad. I got a good student here. But then he scolds him and sends him away to cultivate a little more. But he is continuing this, and we have to read this, I think, sincerely. This is not some polite. Sometimes you'll hear this. People say, "My fellow citizens." They don't really mean your fellow citizens. It means I up on Olympus is going to talk to you now, and I treat you in that way, but I really don't think you're equal with me. This is not that. He says this Dharma teaching of ours, and by this he means not his alone. And we want to be clear about this. Later in the chapters, it's become very clear that he's not talking about Hui Neng's philosophy or his individualistic take on the Dharma. He's talking about a philosophy and a way of cultivating that goes back to the Buddha himself. The lineage that he's accessing here is the lineage of the direct pointing of the mind, the direct teaching of the mind. And it's accessible to anyone. That's not the point here. It's not like it's a special Dharma. But he's saying the teaching of ours goes back to, is rooted in these earliest teachings coming out of the experience, the awakening experience of Shakyamuni Buddha. Now, over time, those teachings became multifaceted and multi-layered, getting at a number of ways of replicating the Buddha's awakening experience. However, it is the replicating of that awakening experience is at the heart of this. And that's why he says this teaching of ours goes back to concentration and wisdom. We have to unpack this a little bit, but essentially what he's saying here is wisdom, and what he means by wisdom, this full awakening to the nature of reality as it really is. And I would say, maybe refine this a little bit. What he means by wisdom is not something you get or something you even have, but maybe better said, something that gets or has you. In other words, wisdom is a transformation so that your whole being is different than what it was before. Therefore, the one that wanted it, when it is acquired, is no longer the one that gets it. Okay? It is changing you into something else. And so I would say it's an unattached, unbound, liberated, direct seeing things as they really are, number one, and number two, acting accordingly, acting appropriately by what that nature is. So it's not simply something you see and understand, but it also involves this dynamic acting where you're acting accordingly to the way things really are. This is called Ru Dao, entering the way, okay? So here we have to look at wisdom as something that is a way of being, almost a who you are and how you are rather than what you have. And so it's active, it's dynamic, it's not passive. If we could just go back for a minute to this chapter where he talks about wisdom or prajna, and just look at some of these quotes on page 26. Okay, what is this prajna? He says at the chapter on the top of 26. Good and wise friends, what is prajna? In our language, prajna means wisdom. Our language means Chinese. Okay, and that's the Hui of this chapter, Ding and Hui. It's what he says, in every place and in every moment, in thought after thought, never becoming muddled and constantly acting wisely, this is practicing prajna. So prajna is something that is practiced, and it's practiced in every moment and thought after thought. It's a continuous, interactive, balanced state of never becoming muddled and constantly acting according to the way things really are and in response to that. So this is very interesting. If you go, let's see, look at the bottom again of 27. Use your own true nature and its inherent wisdom to contemplate and illuminate all dharmas without grasping or rejecting them. Again, very dynamic, active definition of wisdom. It's using your own, applying your own true nature. It's not pulling away from reality. It's an actually heightened attunement to the way really things are. In fact, pulling away from reality leads to the opposite of wisdom. It leads to affliction because you are no longer seeing things as they really are, either because you're afraid of them and you want to push them away, or because you have a fondness and you want to get them. And in the midst of that, your wisdom stops. It's like a gear that goes and then comes to a halt. It's like these submarine movies, digression, here it comes. Submarine movies are going down, 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 and all of a sudden the engine turns off and everybody panics because there's no steering anymore. Wisdom is like that. Wisdom means you got to keep that engine going. You have to keep the balance. You have to keep things working. As soon as you turn it off, it sinks. As soon as you attach or push away, it sinks and stops. So Jung, using the nature, it's very active, dynamic, to contemplate. Now to contemplate means to see things truly from a position of concentration, and we'll come back to that, what concentration means in this context. But you're contemplating, it's Guan Yin Guan, who contemplates. So Guan Yin contemplates, what does Guan Yin contemplate? I'm not asking a totally deep thing, I'm just, what does Guan Yin contemplate? The sounds of the world. Okay, so let's say Guan Yin puts on headphones and tunes out the world. It's like, oh, samadhi, yeah. No, Guan Yin's got the ear organ open at all dimensions and listening to the sounds of people. And the sounds of people are not just their words, it's the emanations from their hearts and their feelings, their quiet sufferings and miseries. It's the whole, nexus of human expression that sometimes is nonverbal. Guan Yin is contemplating this, but also says Guan Yin is at the same time returning the hearing to listen to her or his own essential nature. Now, which is it? Is Guan Yin returning the hearing to listen to her essential nature, like headphones, or is Guan Yin got the ear organ open and contemplating the sounds? Yes. Okay. It's both. And that's what he's going to in this chapter. It's not an either or. It's like, wow, how do you do that? It's really interesting. But apparently, returning the hearing to listen to the self-nature means you are entering the state of the unattached, unbound, liberated consciousness. It doesn't mean you're turning it off. You're just disengaging it from attaching to anything. That opens it up to function freely, widely, and receive all things. So therefore, the outer contemplation of things as they really are in the sounds of the world, and the inner stillness, meaning the stillness of not moving towards or against anything, leads to this paradox, if you will. Listening to the sounds of the world, yet never leaving the quietude and purity of the essential nature. Total movement and stillness perfection. Okay? So just, these are some from the Prajna chapter. Now let's go back. I don't want to digress totally, just a little bit. So then concentration, ding, in the Chinese, which can mean what? Oh, my tone, Yihuan. Fourth, ding. Okay, tones. Guan Yin's not tone deaf either, so she probably would learn Chinese faster than I do. But ding, what does it mean? Literally. Stable. Huh? Still, stable. Okay. Sometimes it means fixed. Now, the problem with this is the Chinese chose this word for the Sanskrit samadhi. Okay, so this is part of a translation issue which we're wrestling with all the time. So it's stable, fixed. I'd like to think of ding as settled. And sometimes it means you've settled the matters. But settled doesn't mean then dead. Settled means now I have balance. I'm not leaning one way or the other. I'm not inclined towards or against. I am centered. So I would say ding could mean centered. Centered in the essential nature, which means fully aware, fully awake, at the same time, and let's use this language, unmoved or unmoving, and by this I mean not phased, not disturbed, not perturbed, not stirred to emotional tension, stress, anxiety, not stirred to lust, not stirred to fear, not stirred to depression or hubris or anything like that. So basically it's talking about an affliction-free zone. AFZ. I think, entering Berkeley is an AFZ, affliction. We put, afflictions and then the thread thing with the thing through. No afflictions here. An affliction-free zone. An affliction-free zone means that in the state of ding or settledness or unperturbedness, there is no movement out of the alert calm of that essential nature. So there's no arising of the afflictions. Fanao in Chinese. So the absence of those afflictions which come from thirst and misunderstanding no longer take over and take charge and take hold of you. If they don't take charge and take hold, that settling of the dust, it's called, is a kind of coolness, ding. It's a kind of settledness. And it actually, ironically, doesn't restrict you, because I don't like focus and concentration imply almost a restricting of something. But in fact, what this does is open you up 360 degrees to the full capacity of the mind, which, as the Sixth Patriarch says, is to know things, to know all things, to be everywhere engaged and nowhere attached. Whereas the Avatamsaka says, everywhere observing, and yet at the same time always still. This is what this means. So then concentration we'd have to describe is a sort of imperturbability. Anyways, you can't be moved off center, but that doesn't mean you're not responsive. You respond appropriately. And you'll see this again and again in the text. He warns, if you put yourself into a zone out, a pull away from reality, a kind of oblivion, this is not concentration. It's a deviant concentration. It is an attachment to stillness. And therefore, you shrink or put a tourniquet on the flow of your wisdom, which has to be free-flowing and interactive, at the same time clinging to nothing. So as soon as you take concentration or focus, you start to think of something that reduces awareness down to a single point. Now, although this is an element of beginning practice, okay, let me stress this. An element of beginning practice sometimes involves concentration exercises where you do bring your awareness down to a single point. But that's kindergarten. Okay, I want to be really clear about that. This is training wheels practice, and the only reason you do that is because the mind is so uncontrolled and by our habits so scattered that we have to use a very strong antidote to bring it back into some field where we can start to work with it again. We have to corral and harness it down to a kind of arena of singleness that it can then watch and observe how the wildness of our passions and intensity of our emotions and longings and lusts just run roughshod over us. So your concentration at that point is create some platform of observation where you can watch the movement of your mind and your emotions going all over the place. But once you start to observe that and see what's happening and see, wow, this is really funny because there's really nothing going on, but here I am grasping, attaching, running wild, the monkey mind, blah, 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 and you kind of, whoa, chill, I got to get this thing under control. You kind of, you pull it back, get it under control, say, you did that yesterday, it hurt, come on, come on. And then from that concentration, you let go of that concentration of the singleness and move on to what he calls the Da Sanmei, the great samadhi. Okay, so this is worth going into. It is true that beginning practice consists of often meditation or mental exercises or training that have to do with pulling awareness into zones of focused attention. But this is not the ultimate goal. This is more and less an expedient mean to open up and liberate the mind so that it can be fully everywhere observant, which is its innate capacity, but now not out of control. Okay, this is really important. And my teacher would often say, yeah, really easy, come for a week, you sit here on cushions, everybody, you get your free meals, when you get up, go to the bathroom, hit the bellfish, everything's good, your mind's in samadhi. He said it doesn't count much at all, because it only counts once you walk out the front door, and then what happens? If it is thus unmoving in the midst of the 10,000 things, that might be the real thing. But it doesn't count just because you've closed down your awareness and field, reduced your friends and family and relationships, and if you're lucky, turned off your devices, which is probably more troublesome than friends and family at this point in terms of attachments. Sorry, I go editorializing, but I had the experience lately of seeing just how addictive these things are in terms of scattering concentration and awareness in the exact moment to something that is no longer here and now. So the ancient text says that when one attends to the here and now, when one attends to the here and now, it's like, I'll get back to the true later. I got the here and now, but are you here and now? Well, I'm kind of here and now there. But there is somebody who's there is here and now with me. It's like, where is the there? Where is this? There's no there. There's no point. It's just like 100 points scattered throughout with no, anyhow. So go back here, what it's talking about then in concentration, and this is now a part of a formula called the San Wu Lo Shui, the 3 non-outflow studies. Now here we have the 2, which is concentration and wisdom. The one that precedes this is Shila. So it's Shila, Samadhi, Prajna. Morality or ethics, concentration and wisdom. Sometimes in Chinese it's Jie Ding Hui. Okay, so this is basically, it's a very ancient, not just Buddhist, I would call it epistemological model, a way of knowing and understanding about the nature of reality that applies to many traditions that have wisdom as their basis. And what they're saying is wisdom is gained, or wisdom is recovered, through a series of study practice exercises that involve clarifying your karma so that what you're doing and thinking and saying is no longer reverberating with unwholesome effects, disturbing your field of awareness. When that shila, that precepting or that discipline training of your activities of body, mouth, and mind becomes pure and relatively stable, it allows for the next one, which they say is in samadhi, a unperturbed, undisturbed awareness of mind, an equanimity that can observe things without the traces or the waves rushing through of all the things that you've done to hurt yourself and others and so on and so forth. And then it says, this is the standard formula, out of those two, naturally, wisdom or insight opens of itself. So when your karma is pure, and when your mind is settled and unmoving, in that state, wisdom is something that comes naturally. It opens of itself. It doesn't be something you have to then seek on top of that. It is the natural flowering of these two. Now, what the Sixth Patriarch is doing here with this, he's pushing the envelope a little bit to what he calls the direct teaching or mind ground. So he says, that's okay. And you'll see in another chapter when he calls a thief comes, but we'll get to that later. A thief comes, and he asks the Dharma thief, someone that's coming to steal the Dharma, what does your teacher teach? And he says, basically, teach some morality, concentration, and wisdom. And then he asks him about it. He says, my mind's a little different. So it's not like he's saying, I don't teach morality and concentration, and wisdom, but I teach it differently. So this is what this is getting at. So now we look back. Now, in the formula, the provisional formula, Shila, Samadhi, Prajna, you could see that as sequential, or that one leads to the other. First you have the Shila, then you develop the concentration, and then from this, eventually the wisdom. Now, what he's saying here, he says, they're not two. And of course, in the formula, they're not three. What? Then he says concentration is the essence of wisdom, and wisdom is the functioning of concentration. So he's saying these two are not sequential, they're simultaneous. Okay? This is because he's saying if you do, okay, let's look at this and you say, well, wait a minute. But if you said, if you truly had that kind of concentration, that means that mind that is so settled and centered that in the midst of the 10,000 things you never get thrown off, then you are in, by his definition, prajna. You are functioning, responding appropriately in thought after thought, moment to moment. You are manifesting that state so that, in fact, wisdom is just concentration, and concentration is just wisdom. They don't go sequentially. They're actually happening at the same time. Now, if you want to go back, he doesn't do this, but my teacher did. He said, if you truly are holding the precepts, you become the precepts, and the precepts become you. Your self-nature is precepted. You are so precepted that you don't even hold the precepts anymore, because you couldn't even have a stirring that would move you off that ground. Therefore, that too is concentration, that too is simultaneously wisdom. So they're not three, they're one. And as they function simultaneously. So it's really only for a kind of maybe a theoretical understanding that we break them down into three and talk about them in this way. But the true functioning of each one completes the other two. Wisdom includes the total functioning of concentration and precepts. Precepts includes the total expression of wisdom and concentration. It's sort of like, wow. And the thing he's doing here, why he's doing this, is because some people can get attached to their concentration practice, or to their holding of precepts, or into the quest for wisdom. And he said, when you do this, you step away from this non-dual, immediate functioning. Now go back, straighten out your mind, and all of these manifest of themselves. So where there's wisdom, concentration exists right within the wisdom, And where there's concentration, wisdom exists right within the concentration, just as we explained. If you grasp the meaning of this, you know that wisdom and concentration are complementary and steady practice together. Okay, first phase. Any questions? Clear? A little more on this, on the samadhi. So that's the Sanskrit for concentration. There are, if you read various texts and various shastras, you'll see a whole series of different kinds of meditation exercises, sometimes called samadhi, samapatis, and so forth, which are gradation stages of meditation practice with differing focus, concentration, sometimes on objects, sometimes on colors, sometimes on mantras, and so on and so forth. What this teaching is saying, it's okay, it's all good, if you understand it's not ultimate. Okay? So all of these are medicines to correct a particular form of scatteredness and dissoluteness. But once that is corrected, then you let go of these devices, these temporary devices. And the caveat here throughout is, but if you cling to them, if you cling to your meditation practice, then it turns into a spiritual sickness. It actually turns into an encumbrance because you have not liberated yourself from the expedient. The expedient is meant to get you to the other shore. This is the raft analogy. Once on the other shore, the purpose is served. You let go of the raft. Not only do you let go of it, you actually naturally let go of it because it served its purpose. It's almost like it would be foolish to you at this point to pick up the raft. But some people do. And he's saying what you do is you cripple yourself here. Instead of using it to cross over, you use it to cling and to sink. And you can become immobile. So this immobility, holding the raft, is a really good expression for religious ideology. Instead of being a gate to liberation, it becomes a myopic encumbrance to the full expression of the mind. It limits and narrows you down. And then, of course, it leads to affliction, anger, resentment, righteousness, fighting, violence, and even massive killing, all in the name of holding the raft, right? So it's very important. It's not just has some kind of inner psychological dimension to this. It has a profound social and natural dimension to it as well. We have to consider. Okay, so while that term is used, I can tell you from in the tradition that he's coming from, and I suppose the one I was trained in, samadhi is not seen as anything special. And it's like, I can remember this book by a cricket teacher. I'll say a cricket teacher, because it definitely was a cricket teacher in the 60s, late 70s actually. He started in Los Angeles. Now, this is nothing to say that Los Angeles fosters these, but he started in Los Angeles, and he had a sort of a Johnny Carson stick. Now, when I say that, some of you go, oh yeah, and other people go, who? Who's Johnny Carson? Never mind. Johnny Carson was a TV host who would come out really sort of like a golf pro, say a few jokes, and then have his evening show, but very casual, laid back, whatnot. So this teacher was this way. He'd just come out, say a few jokes, very casual, down in Malibu or someplace, and then say to his students, now, why, you guys all want to kind of like enter samadhi? They go, yeah. You all paid up? Yeah, they paid at the door, $250. Had a few cocktails. They're sitting there. He says like, okay, I want you all to look into my eyes and listen to my voice as I go, and pretty soon everybody entered samadhi. Basically what it was mass hypnotism, but that's beside the point. When they went home and tried it, they couldn't do it. They only come back, another $250, they could do it with him. But then he wrote a book, Samadhi's Loose in America. That's the name of the book. Please don't read this. It's not an endorsement, but Samadhi Loose in America, the cover attraction was the Buddha. No. Was the Bodhisattva? No. Was it Ananda with his begging bowl? No. It was a Playboy bunny on top of a Porsche with her legs crossed. She couldn't even do full. She was doing half lotus. And the title was Samadhi's Loose in America. It means it's loose. You can get it. Go get it. And so he would go back and forth between San Francisco and LA to these various places selling samadhi, which was basically hypnotic trance that he would induce. In any event, so going back to this point, Samadhi in this tradition of the great vehicle, in other words, the direct teaching great vehicle, is not looked upon as something extraordinary or special. It's looked upon as natural. It is, in fact, our natural state of mind. It isn't something to strive to achieve or to attain or to hunger for or even to lust after. It is the natural workings of our liberated consciousness in our mind. And the question is not how do I get it, but how did I cover it over? How did I impede it? And so the effort of cultivation, why this effort on changing Xi Qi Mao Bing, false habits, wrong habits, character traits that are off, is not other than the opening and releasing of the innate samadhi and concentration and wisdom that is there. Because once those restrictions are pulled off, it just naturally functions in its full capacity. To think it's something you have to seek, one, leads you down a crooked road because you'll never get it seeking it, but it also turns you away from the real work of changing your person, changing your habits, changing your faults. So it's a double loss. It's a lose-lose by seeking samadhi. So my teacher used to, when I first came in, I was like, yeah, samadhi, whoa. And he would do things like, once during a lecture, he was just sitting there, we were doing some text that had to do with this, and he said, do you all think entering samadhi is really something special? He says, it's not, watch. And it was like a light bulb going on and off. I'm like, what? He just went like this and just entered this incredible state, obviously totally focused and concentrated, and then popped out. And he said, nothing to it, no big deal. And then just went on. It's like, whoa. Like, you could say, well, it was just a trick, but it wasn't actually a trick. And I could see, like, his state that he could get into a removed absorption and come back out of. Wow, I couldn't even do that. And I would allow him to do it and stay in it. And then he would say things like, almost derisive or scolding. For example, I'd be going around reciting the Buddha's name, Om Tofu, Om Tofu, and cooking lunch. Om Tofu. And pretty soon something's burning, going, Om Tofu, Om Tofu. You know, my nose is in samadhi, my ears in samadhi. And he'd come in the kitchen, you know, smell. He says, 坐下嘛, what are you doing? And he'd go, 入定嘛? Did you enter samadhi? It was like whack, he'd hit you with that. What did you enter samadhi? And it was kind of like, oh, that wasn't a compliment. That was a correction. Now, wait a minute. I thought entering samadhi was my mind's unmoving, reciting the Buddha's name, thus, and da-da-da. And he's saying, no, it's cooking lunch appropriately for everybody. Because your samadhi's going to make everybody sick. Huh? Whoa. And so I just bring this up to show that the use of samadhi is in this expression as some form of concentration and focus that removes you from reality is what he meant by Ru Dingma, kind of like enter samadhi, which is zone out, man. Tune in, get back. Oh. So he said, so, you know, if you can cook lunch and prepare it appropriately without your mouth watering, that might be samadhi. Anyhow, so here I'm pointing to this, that the samadhi being talked about, and we'll get to this in the next chapter, what he calls the Da Sanmei, the great samadhi, has no point of entry and no point of leaving. So the practice of doing the meditation practice, we're doing the provisional training wheels thing. We start with, that's called enter samadhi, everybody. And then for 45 minutes you enter samadhi. Your eyes, ears, nose, tongue, body, and mind return away from the sense objects, the sensory world. You bring your concentration to your meditation topic, and you begin the training, the gymnastic training, you know, that's a preliminary to the real samadhi. And then when that's done, I say, leave it, you enter out. So you enter in with that, and you leave it with the bell. That's provisional samadhi training. It's not the ultimate, nor is it the goal. It's just the beginning to give you some purchase over the wild horses that are running. Now his Da Sanmei, he's talking about, if there's no entry and no leaving, then how do you get it? How do you get it if there's no point of entry and no point of departure? Now you could say, once I'm in there, I don't depart, okay, but he's saying there's no point of entry either. You don't enter it, you don't leave it. It's kind of like a riddle. We'll get to this later, but he has another word for it. He calls it the I Ching Sanmei, the single practice samadhi. Now, single practice samadhi doesn't mean I just practice one thing. Again, I'll digress. We had monks in the monastery who entered what they thought was a single practice samadhi. So on any given day, they decided they would only eat one thing. This was a kind of way they trained themselves. I'm laughing because they always chose the best thing for that particular day. So, you know, in the days when we started, to have an avocado was a real luxury, especially for me because I'm from Wisconsin and we don't have those there. So when I first came, I said, what are those weird apples? And someone said avocados. I thought, whoa. And then I got a taste of it, and they're not bad. You know, they're pretty good. And so when we have a day where a lay donor would bring in a bag full of avocados, say 30 avocados, and then, you know, and then you're doing your meditation, you're going, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. I'm in for an avocado today. Because although I was last in the food line, you know, everybody went. Even if they took 2, which they wouldn't, they'd take 1. By the time I got there, I could still have an avocado. So my samadhi was avocado, gonna get an avocado, swopa, right? And so it turns out by this Dutanga monk, who was the first in line, would change his I Ching Sanmei every day to a single practice. Now that day, while he was sitting, the gods or whatever inspired him to enter the avocado samadhi, and he decided that day he would have only avocados. And he was a big monk and he had a big bowl. And so he would go in line and you'd watch him pop those seeds out of the avocado, boom, 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 boom. I mean, he had some gung fu because he was just, and I'm watching 2, 6, 10, 20, and he's got his whole thing full of, and he squishes it down, and then with beatific samadhi walks to his table. And now, there was 2 left. I'm at the end of the line. You can guess the scenario. By the time I got there, it was incredible dukkha. This is the dukkha of never getting what you seek. Now I'm thinking, oh, they're helping me. They're really, by doing this, they're helping me experience the dukkha of not getting what I want. And then the next day, maybe there was bananas, and he would, you know, again, those are kind of rare at the monastery. He would go into banana samadhi. And so the bananas, and then he'd do the peanut butter samadhi. Now, peanut butter was rare at the time, too. You didn't get that all the time. He never went into the vegetable samadhi, and he never went into the white rice samadhi. No. He was at a higher level. Those are the first samadhis you go to. So I'm just saying this single practice samadhi is not that. What it is, it means 24/7, you don't separate from this. It's called standing, walking, lying down. This means even in sleep. And sitting, you're constantly in this undisturbed equanimity of full awareness and not perturbed or changing. And so this is the meaning of a teaching that comes, and you'll understand this. It means attend to the here and now, and the false returns to true. The here and now is right in that state, thought after thought, moment to moment, never leaving this. And then it says, the verse goes something like this. Walking, standing, sitting, lying down, never leave this, never separate from this. If you separate from this, before your eyes, you'll go amiss. This is the verse, and my teacher. So walking, standing, sitting, never separate from what is this? It's the functioning of the wisdom. It's the essential nature. Do not leave your essential nature. This is your compass. This is the balancing point. It's your, I guess you'd call it, what do they use on the spaceships again? The gyroscope. It's a gyroscope that is spinning, but keeps you balanced in the midst of all the turnings and whatnot. Things turn, but you don't turn by them. You turn and you turn them, and you're in the movement of this, but there's no place that anything sticks and no place that you grab out and attach. That balance is describing do not separate from this. Now, to not separate from this means you have to have an understanding of how you get moved and turned. You have to take an inventory where your weak spots are, where your attachments are. And it's not obvious at the beginning. For some people, it's food. For some people, it's fame and attention. You know, I started to think about the whole, what do you know, the tweet, the constant, I'm here, you're here, where are you? You're there, I'm here too. You know, what are you doing? I'm texting you, well, I'm texting you back. Oh, that's interesting. You know, and this goes on, you know, but it's part of the fame craving. You see, we translate fame as somebody who wants big attention, wants a big name. But it's this insecurity that you won't count, you won't matter, that you miss out on something. This feeling like I'm not noticed, I'm not important. The quest for this is a part of the fame thing. It's one of the 5 basic desires, food and fame. And that fame means I need to be recognized, I need to be acknowledged, I need to be important, I need you to need me, right? But what if I need you to need me, then I need myself more than I need you. So how could I, you know, you get back to the narcissism of this is just stunning. How can you be loved by someone who's narcissistic? How can someone who's narcissistic want you? They don't want you, they only want themselves. It's like, never mind, I won't launch into it, but it's part of the fame. And then there's sexual sensuality, that's another one, food, fame, sex, and wealth. But the wealth thing doesn't just mean the acquisition of a lot. It means always wanting that next best thing. It's always not, you say, well, I don't want the high-end one, I just want that new one. And you know it's a quest because as soon as you get that, there's almost a little dissatisfaction creeping in as the next version comes out. It can be as simple as a little Bic pen. And they'll say, nah, special from Japan, a really micro one that, you know, blah, blah, blah. And then you want that one. Or it can be a car, or it can be an island. And then you get your island, and, you know, but it's the mind that constantly wants, which is the desire of wealth. It's not what you get, and it's not even what you long for. You know, it could be an avocado. That is the purchase of the wealth object, or it could be a whole island. You know what I'm saying? So you have to see these from the mind ground, not in the objects themselves, but in the mentality that it triggers. And then finally, sleep. It's like, well, how could sleep become? Well, if you sleep not too much and not too little, it's like you're eating food. But sleep often turns into a kind of escapism. You see? And so it's the mind that wants to sleep beyond the point that's healthy, that then it becomes a desire or a thirst that can cripple. And I think, it's not just talking about what you do in bed, in your, you know, on your pillow. Sleep is a state of mind that can be while you're sitting up. You can do sleep, walking, standing, sitting, and lying down. What do you mean? You zone out into to the screen, to the video game, to this. You're in a sleep mode. You have reduced your consciousness down to an oblivion. So oblivion is this sleep state that you want to be out of, you just go, oh, I'm out of everything. Nothing can touch me. That's my sleepy. And my sleepy can be the pillow, but can also be a device. It can also be a drug. Is alcohol not a form of sleep in that sense? So you see, you have to reinterpret these not just as the objects of what it is, but the mind behind it. That's mind ground looking at the 5 desires. Now, I don't know how I got there. I think I digressed somehow. But anyhow, we're out of time anyhow. So next week, oh, no, not next week. This is our last class tonight. February 5th? February 5th, the first Friday in the first week of February, we'll pick up again. I was going to push it forward, and then some of my students remind me that I've entered the samadhi of forgetfulness, which means I forget how burned out I get at the end of the semester, and though I'm eager to start up again, I usually cut my vacation short, which then cuts my concentration short, which then cuts my temper short, which then makes me unlivable. So I will take the full break this time, not to watch TV, but do Chan. This is my time for doing Chan. I usually choose the winter time, like a rainy night like tonight. It's really good. There's just a natural stillness to the world. When I was back in Wisconsin, it was even more wonderful because those would be snowstorms and blizzards. And that that snow would just come down, and it was just like an invading quiet army, and just this white would settle. And as it settled, all the noises became muted because snow softens sound. So the world became lit up. The snow reflects light, but it also dimmed the sound. So I would just go walking out in my snowshoes, come in, put some wood on the fire and just sit. And you could hear that wind blowing outside, and nothing moved because the snow stopped normal activity. Schools were closed, trucks and cars didn't go, and it was just this wonderful free vacation given by nature. Rain isn't quite like that. We persist in pushing through the rain, but if you imagine the rain to be snow and you say, when it rains, I can't go anywhere, then, just do some chan. It's a good time. The weather is a little cooler. That means you can be a little more alert when you think, to don't jack up the temperature in your place, let it be a little cool. And allow yourself to, as Lao Tzu's expression, like the big fish, sink to the bottom of the water, the bottom of the pond where nobody can find you. And then he says, and lose yourself in the way. Just get lost in the way. So, for 4 or 5 weeks, get lost in the way, and we'll see you back in February. And we'll do the transference. May every living being, our minds as one and radiant with light, share the fruits of peace with hearts of goodness, luminous and bright. If people hear and see how hands and hearts can find in giving unity, may their minds awake to great compassion, wisdom, and to joy. May kindness find reward. May all who sorrow leave their grief and pain. May this boundless light break the darkness of their endless night. Because our hearts are one, this world of pain turns into paradise. May all become compassionate and wise. May all become compassionate and wise. Ding Li San Bao.